Hey, so I wanted to make a speech about acting. I just saw one of my LA friends perform a Christmas thing, and also I'm really heavily into music, and it's also something that I'm trying to kind of figure out how the two connect. I think what happens with acting, especially when we're riffing, is we go in and we start to riff, or even if we have something really memorized. What I notice when I'm watching is I can sometimes tell if someone has something memorized or if someone is riffing. When I go back to Brando and I think of Marlon Brando, I think the thing that made Marlon Brando good wasn't the fact that whether he memorized the speech or whether he didn't have it memorized, right? So later on in Marlon Brando's career, he stopped memorizing. He would just want to know what the character was going through and what was going on in the scene, and then he just went off. But I think what Stella Adler made, I think Stella Adler probably told Brando, no matter what you do, you can't be fake. No matter what you do, you can't be a fake person. So that's when I think he got into a sense of conviction. Because I think Brando said, well, man, if I didn't make it as an actor, I'd probably end up as a bum. Because he was in New York in a rough place, right? Where they're not that forgiving. Especially when it comes to the fact that if you don't work, then you're on the sidewalk. Brando did work. I think maybe he worked maybe a little too hard. But what I think what I'm reason what really I'm not making this post about Marlon Brando. What I'm making this post about is that first of all we have to go back and we have to thank Marlon Brando for breaking all those rules that were not broken before he came about. James Dean kind of riffed on it, but if you look at James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause, it's all fake. I mean, it really is. It's almost like a ballet performance. I mean, he's doing all this, Brando didn't do it that way, and Brando was very upset at Dean, and Dean did all this stuff with his hand because Brando had a gesture that he'd make with his hand, and he would do this thing with his hand. But Dean did it in a different way, and I don't think Dean had the training that Marlon Brando had. James Dean was good. I don't think everything James Dean did was fake, but I think what we do, and this is the point of this post, is I think we get caught up in realism. So we're like, man, this scene is going good, and if you're thinking that in the scene, like, man, that sounded real, then it's not. It's not gonna. It's gonna come. We're gonna see your your critique happening in your head. There's nothing wrong with observing yourself as an actor, but it makes it weaker. Okay, does that make sense? So if you're observing yourself as an actor, it's going to make the performance a little bit weaker. It doesn't make it. It doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. And I was watching Matt Dillon. And the thing about Matt Dillon, he is one of the last Strasbergian actors. Keep your eyes on Matt Dillon, okay? Matt Dillon was trained by Lee Strasberg. And I was just watching Drugstore Cowboy, which Gus Van Sant made. And Gus Van Sant, he's a good filmmaker with a 35 millimeter. Now we're in a different age now. We're all digital. But the 35 millimeter was more kind of like paintings. But the thing about Matt that made that movie is his performance. Matt Dillon, that movie would not have been good without Matt Dillon. And I noticed there was something that he did in one scene. It was something he was pointing, and he pointed. He made a gesture, and he was pointing, and he covered his hand or something. But this was not a thought that I don't think Matt Dillon was planning. I had a mime teacher, and he was pantomime and mime, and he said, these things that Brando does, these things, they're all planned. I don't think they're planned completely. I think maybe it's something that maybe he's aware of. I think it's something Brando was aware of, these things. And they could be possibly planned. But I read that about think about the method, and especially method acting, is that verisimilitude is part of it, right? So we're seeing a performance and it's real because it mimics what life is. So it's something that's real, and we go, oh, well, yeah, I believe in that. That's real. But I think the actor is using his imagination, and he's lost in this moment, and things start to come out, right? Where Dylan did this thing where and then he did something. It's in a scene when he's talking to the love interest in that or something, and he's leaning over, and of course Gus Van Sant got a good enough shot of him, but his hand went down and he covered his hand or something. He did something weird. It was something that didn't make any sense. Kind of like in Awakenings, and I'm throwing this one out to Cooper, when Cooper talked to Robert De Niro about this thing that De Niro did when he was playing the disabled, chronically ill patient that had a dopamine problem, right, in Awakenings. So he had a dopamine problem, and he almost like Parkinson's, so he was shaking. And he did this thing where it was coming out of, and I never got the answer to that, but I remember De Niro telling Cooper that was a good question. So did it come out of a gesture that he planned, this thing that he did, or was it something that came out of impulse, or something that came out of the fact that he was lost in imagination, and then this gesture came about? I never got the answer to it. I just got the question. But I think what I did read when I first got involved with method acting, when I started studying in Fort Worth at the public library, is where I found all the information about the actor studio and stuff. I found it at the library. And I started studying this book called The Actor Studio, but I think it was also called Method Actors. And it had a little bio on each actor. I forgot who wrote it and who edited it, but it talked about verisimilitude, but it also talked about something that was important. And it talked about how the actor, the method actor, will do something consciously that we do every day unconsciously and with conviction. So if you're going to riff on something, take your time with the riff and do it with conviction, because you know that you can't be fake, right? Even if you do it fake, you're still a real living person living on the planet. I think Strasberg talked about a line. And now this might be something I heard. It could have been a rumor, but he talked about a line, okay? Like a proscenium line on a stage. And this line that he drew, just think of a line drawn in the sand, okay? And he said that you're real and I'm real. We're both real, right? So be real, and I'm going to be real too while I'm watching you, right? I'm going to see you as you are. I think doing it with conviction doesn't mean that you're overdoing it so that you have conviction, but because of who you are in that moment, just like a song, because the first thing I talked about in this post was music. And just like a song, you do it with conviction. I was also watching Ethan Hawke and The Kid. I haven't watched all of it. It looks pretty good. Vincent D'Onofrio directed it, the guy from Full Metal Jacket and a bunch of other films, and he even did Sam Shepard stuff on Broadway. But Vincent D'Onofrio is an interesting actor, and I think he does a lot of stuff with conviction. But in this directing piece that he's done, he directed The Kid. I think when I'm watching Ethan Hawke, the thing is that I think he's interesting because he goes back and forth from doing something with conviction and then sometimes ambiguity, which is interesting about him. So it catches my interest. It's like two schools of acting sometimes. And then there was a moment where he's playing an authority figure in this. I believe it's he's playing the authority. So the lawman, he yells and screams in it, but I bought it, because when someone's panicking and they need their job to be done, they will do that. They will go up and yell at someone. They will yell at someone in their face and stuff to get their job done. And I believed it because he did it with conviction. And since he was convicted when he did it, then there was no overacting. I guess that's maybe something that I'm saying. If there is a meaning for the reason why you're doing something, I think if you're in the imagination of that character and you're asking yourself if, and you have to get that done and you're imagining it and you're in that world, it's going to be with conviction. If you're not imagining it, then you're going to be critiquing it. And is what I did real? And we're going to see that you're critiquing what you're doing. There's nothing wrong with being your own observer and to critique what you're doing. But there is something wrong with not being in the imagination and not asking yourself if this was happening to me and then going forward with it. Because that's what starts it. That's what Meisner kind of talked about, something called quick as a flame. That was whenever you put your own life, your own imagination, your own world into it. So you imagine something from your own world. Then you manipulate that imagination for a little bit. Like if I thought of my son right now graduating, okay, I'm thinking of my son graduating high school, I'm manipulating the world that hasn't happened yet, right? Quick as a flame is also putting yourself in your imagination, right? You can do that while you're doing it. It starts up the engine of the imagination and puts you in there. So if you're riffing, it's going on inside of you. And we're going to see that go inside of you, that imagination. You're not thinking about, am I being real or not? Is this conviction or not? Is this real or not? You're thinking about what you need to be thinking about in the story. And it could be because of the research you did. And it could be just because of your imagination. So I think when you're lost in your imagination, they talk about the method actor being like in a bubble, right? I think that bubble is their imagination happening around them. Then Meisner talked about us being in tune with the other actor and breaking that bubble, right? So that bubble goes away, but we can't. It's a balancing act. It's like juggling. You might be going to Meisner over here. The next thing you know, you're using Strasberg and you're using sense memory. Then you go back to Meisner again, and you're breaking that bubble and you're sharing that moment. So when you're riffing. So when I was watching this actor from LA doing this riff, that's what I was asking. There was nice moments that were happening. But yet I could see him maybe critiquing himself a little bit. And that might be an issue of conviction. But not trying to be a showman in conviction, but in the conviction of being lost in that imaginary world. And what do you do to get into that imaginary world? There can be little things that you can do. There can be things that, what Uta Hagen talked about, inner objects, where you're thinking of something inside that you've already planted throughout the monologue or throughout the thing about the riff. It's preparation, just like anything else. It's just like a painting. So you got these little moments, and you've got this part isolated where you can go there, and then you can go to the next part. And eventually, if you try that a couple times and then you start to riff, then you can start to see the painting happening. So you got this. I think also Strasberg talked about a house. He separated different parts of the consciousness, and there was a subconscious and all this stuff. And some people don't even believe in a subconscious. They only believe in the conscious and the unconscious. So I think in riffing and making something up, you're going somewhere with conviction because you're lost in that imagination. And they want to see your imagination working, and then you're connecting. I think I'm kind of exhausting the issue, but that's what I wanted to talk about. I felt passionate enough I wanted to bring that about, because telling a story is interesting, but watching someone tell a story and then being lost in their own imagination is really interesting. Because you see someone else being interested in something, really interested in it for a reason, right? It's not just being interested in it because you want to be a showman or you want to be an actor. You're being interested in it because of a reason. And that's what makes the great actor, as opposed to the actor that's mediocre. Because the actor that's mediocre, or even maybe do something that's ugly or something or it's mediocre, doesn't have that conviction. The one that does it with beauty, and the one that does it above average and even genius, has an immense conviction, has a reason to be there and to do it. There's a reason behind that. He's really walking that tightrope. So when you see someone really walking that tightrope, you will pay attention. I'm not going to mention any names, but you will pay attention, other than the name drops that I've already given. Anyway, 2020 is coming up. We've got about 6 days. that's my acting lesson for 2019.